Hello and welcome. This is the Bits vs. Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Arman Grigic, and today with me is Roeland Kuipers. He's a CTO at Schuberg Philis. Welcome, Roeland.
Yes, Arman, thanks for having me.
Could you tell me a little bit about your background and also how you got to Schuberg Philis?
Yes, of course. I'm with Schuberg Philis as of early 2006. And my background started basically a bit around the dot-com bubble in the more traditional ISP world. So that's where I got introduced to IT.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the older ISPs in the Netherlands, so a bit of more of an infrastructure background in that sense. And I'm actually a school dropout, so I started there.
Oh, really?
After school, basically temporarily. But it attracted me so much, I never left the industry.
Yeah, so you started as an engineer at Schuberg Philis, right?
Yeah.
And moved up. So how was that process like for you? From going from an engineering going from being an engineer to being a CTO? Because I think that's interesting because I'm kind of made the same transition. So
Okay.
I was wondering how that transition was for you.
It actually felt pretty natural for me, except once like you get the title, and like I at first I figured like it won't change that much, but obviously, obviously maybe it's not so obviously, but with the title also sometimes comes that people have a different look at you.
Yeah.
But I think looking at my past, having a strong engineering background. Always have a desire to do stuff more clever, more secure, faster. So innovation was always a bit of a theme. Naturally, it's also that you start to think at a different abstraction level, and I think that's basically how I grew into it.
I can imagine that from my perspective as well is that I started as an engineer, and then you kind of go into the kind of more architecture role, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at it from a little bit of an abstraction layer,
Yeah.
and then after that you see, okay, but I'm pretty good at other stuff as well. So the soft skills about communicating and stuff like that, and then you need to have some luck with it, right?
Yeah.
There has to be someone that says, okay, you could be a good CTO.
Yeah, and also you need to like it, right? Like so, and that's I still crave sometimes for it, just having some terminal time and just
I know that
one. Be behind like the terminal. And I think that's also a good thing, right? Like otherwise, then it becomes a lot of theory, and I try to find. Time to stay hands-on in that perspective as well.
Yeah, and I think that I think that's crucial in some cases to know, right? So to keep up with all the new trends that are there.
Yeah.
It's a little bit harder when you. I mean, speaking from my position, it's harder to keep up with it as much as I did when I was an engineer, because that's almost impossible because you're doing other stuff, right? You're thinking about other stuff, where you're going with the company or where you're technically going and what kind of things you want to explore, right?
Yeah.
And that's been sometimes hard, as you said, to let that go, right?
Yeah.
Because you're focused on, how can I start up something and see if it works.
Yeah.
I still do that sometimes, right? So for some experiments or whatever, I'm like, okay, why not? I'm going to try, right?
Yeah, that's what I like as well, right? Like to see where the world is heading to and how we can adapt to that as well. Putting that dot on the horizon and see how we can get there.
Yeah.
It can also be hard and comes obviously with frustrations. And I think that's also the side. You need to develop, or
you need to have, And could you explain a little bit about what you do at Schuberg Philis? So not you specifically, but what kind of services you provide and stuff like that.
As a company,
Yeah.
So I think traditionally Schuberg Philis is a bit known as a quote unquote hosting company.
Yep.
And that's also where we basically started, but in a niche. The founders have a background where when they founded the company, that if you look at the marks customers gave IT companies were very low, and that they really had a vision that like it must be possible to provide good IT services, right? Like this was around the century change. And that's also the vision they started off the company with, which also intrigued me when I started. Like, I really feel that like you can actually deliver good IT services versus mediocre IT services. And that's also why they said, okay, that we just need to focus and need to organize stuff differently. So focus on this customer satisfaction. And the way they do that is basically having the operating model is based on a crisis model. So in traditional IT organizations, you first, second, and third line, you had a lot of knowledge silos, storage, networking, software development, the database, Oracle, you name it. But when stuff broke, the managers took the bright guys from the different silos, put them in the same room, and they fixed the problem pretty fast. Yeah. And if you kept them a bit longer in the room, then they also brought the fix for the future. So that's the operating model we work from. Dedicated teams for a customer, and we did that traditionally in our own data center. But as you can imagine, it's also a bit of a premium model, so it comes also with premium customers.
Yep.
So that was a lot about dedicated infrastructure, dedicated hosting in our data center, complex, redundant infrastructure. But yeah, like nowadays, there's cloud, so every startup can swipe his credit card and basically have the complex infrastructure we built in the past, and I think that's also what you see how you see Schuberg Philis changing, is that we're moving up the stack as well. So the services now is still outsourcing, and we still have customers in our data center, and it's also customers who really cannot move to the cloud yet, or might never be able to move to the cloud. But in that sense, you see us doing much more software development, integration services of complex application landscapes, but also basically designing banking platforms from scratch, where we have a customer basically depicting the functional requirements, and we help them basically engineer such a banking platform.
Okay.
But it's also full-on digitalization journeys where we automate away paper trails.
I think it's good to go forward on that topic a little bit more, because that's something that we discussed a little bit before we started. But what's interesting to me is that, for example, when I look at digital agencies, right? So they started off with just building a website, and then they came at, okay, we need to host it somewhere. Yeah. And usually what they would do is they would either pick, I'm going to do it myself, I'm getting people that can do this, and we're going to do it ourselves at a hosting company or whatever. Or they would pick a managed hosting company like Schuberg at the time. What's interesting to me is that the other way around, so when you look at the hosting companies, they... not Schuberg in particular, but other hosting companies are a little bit late to the party in that sense, that they don't see that they need to provide more than just the servers, right? Yeah. And more than just doing the infrastructure and stuff like that. So how do you see that? So you've went through that transition already. So do you still feel that a lot of hosting companies are doing it, are looking at it the wrong way still at the moment? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think a big difference with the more traditional hosting companies and us also in the past is that we all, given our focus on customer satisfaction, we from the start felt we need to take ownership from the full stack, and basically also giving the guarantees on the functional side of things. So our SLAs were always based on 100% functional uptime. So that also focused us to think about it also moves you in a functional domain and having forcing you to think on how we can provide that end-to-end stability. So for us, it always was in our DNA, and we slowly grew also into software development. While you still see a lot of hosting companies also providing managed services, basically towards the operating system level, and from there's the demarcation for the client. Yeah. It's interesting to see, like you also say, is obviously that whole ball game towards having an operating system where you can run your code. It's now basically available, call it serverless or so I think a big challenge for these hosting companies is to figure out what is the business value we can actually deliver to a company. And I think that's also what we see is there's so much technology. And I heard somebody say the other day that we might be suffering from technology obesity. There's so much technology.
Yeah, it's true.
And it makes it hard to focus and make choices. So what we tend to do, and that's also what I try to do with my team, is really focus on a business challenge use case, but really define it clearly with the beginning and the end, and focus on that and the business value that delivers to our clients, and then see what technology follows suit to make it happen, depending on their requirements. But that takes a different mindset and also different skills, I guess.
Yeah, and the interesting thing here is that there was a whole hype around cloud, right? So going through transitioning to the cloud, everybody needs to be in the cloud, and that was, I don't know how many years ago, but I think 3 or 4 years ago. It's still a little bit going like that, but I see a lot of companies not doing that, right?
Yeah.
So they're still hovering on the old platform or thinking about going to the cloud, thinking about transitioning, but they're not doing it. So do you have or do you think that there is a real reason for that, why people are still not doing it? Although you have all these advantages, of course, if you run in the cloud.
Yeah, so I think that we see a couple of themes with our enterprise customers, is that at some point it becomes strategic. So everybody's doing, so I must follow suit. So that's one angle. I think a lot of companies underestimate the paradigm shift you have to make. It's a different beast, right? Like, it's different than running VMs in your own data center. You still have the VM side, but there's so much more, right? I think so. Having a bit of a distorted view on the value the cloud is deliver is part to blame, and also the organizational change and the mindset change of the IT people. But also what's in the way with a lot of enterprise customers, the policies they have, the ways of working, the processes which are not compatible on a cloud platform. And there's examples on, like, some companies need to vet and write policies around single individual services. At least that's what they think they need to do. So therefore also limiting the speed of adoption to adopt a cloud. And the other side is, and I think that's a general IT problem, is that we tend to want to do too much at the same time, and then we fall in the trap of the waterfall projects. And if a project nowadays doesn't fit in a 2-year scope, it's almost flawed by design, because the technology pace is so fast. If you only look at what Amazon released last year, I think it's around 1,800 new features and services they release. So you can imagine, if you run a 2-year waterfall project, technology will change while you're doing your scope creep and etc. So I think what we try to do is, like, start small and just get the momentum and get people on board and create a flywheel and move faster and faster. And in the periphery, also do a bit of the organizational change along the way. Because I think that's unavoidable if you want to make. It's a huge change from the traditional on-premise world to a high-paced, high-velocity cloud world.
Yeah, where you have all kinds of services that you can just almost plug and play and start using, right? Yeah. You had a good example before we started about one of your clients that you worked for, that they had a project that they wanted to. Or actually, you did a project where they used all kinds of services, and it was set up within, I don't know what the period was again, but it was set up pretty quickly. So how was that process like, right? So you have a client that's already working on something and already has something, and you want to set up something new that's fast, scalable, and everything like that. How did that go?
Yeah, so in this case, it was a customer who had a business to consumer platform, but how do you say, suffering from extreme peak loads, and the platform couldn't cope with that. And obviously, around these peaks, a lot of engineering effort went in to keep the platform afloat and making sure, like, customers could still use the platform. And with a small team, we started to see, like, this was a more traditional platform still running in our data center. What if we build a prototype of this platform fully cloud native in the cloud? So we basically mimicked the core platform, but also started doing this from a purely functional standpoint, focusing on the most modern technology. So we assembled a team of 5 guys. And it actually blew personal mind as well, but we were able in like roughly 3 days to mimic the core functionality, prototype it on Amazon in this case, fully serverless. And able to scale it 6 times the peaks we suffered. And obviously, the footnote, it was a proof of concept.
Sure.
But I think everybody could see this proof of concept if you would like extrapolate it, like and make it a bit of a bigger project. That it had real possibilities of replacing the core platform. And in the same time, we're actually also being able, because the toolbox the public cloud provides is to also add a lot of other functionality. So they actually did not have any real-time insights on conversion of this platform. So we introduced event-driven patterns, and therefore we were able to stream real-time data into a data lake and give real-time insights on this proof of concept as well. And I think what's interesting, and that's also the discussions we sometimes have with customers, it feels very, dangerous to throw away what you have and start something new from scratch.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think in this case, it was also where we try to challenge the customer, like, if this platform is so differentiating for your business, is this something to consider to take ownership and rebuild it? But this is also challenging, right? Like it means that you need to take on new skills. But I think you can actually make a huge difference on the business side if you are able to make these leaps.
Yeah, and the interesting part here is that if you are talking about such a small period, it's also telling the client, okay, look what we did in this kind of small kind of period. Yeah. What happens if, right? Yeah. What happens if we maybe build that out for 3, 4, 5, 6 months? Yeah. What do you think we'll have by then, right? Yeah. And that's the interesting part, is that a lot of companies look at, for example, building software or whatever, and they're like, okay, we need to build everything ourselves, or at least a lot of the things that we need to do, we need to build ourselves. And I think that's a bit of a skewed perception, right? If you are Google, okay, right? Yeah. Build your own stuff by all means. But if you're a smaller company, we're a smaller company as well. But if you're a smaller company with, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 people or something like that, you're not going to build everything yourself. No. Doesn't make sense.
Of course.
Doesn't make sense anymore. Use services for user management or whatever, just to focus on your main thing, right? Yeah. What are you actually trying to provide for your clients?
And I think the interesting thing is, like, even for this retail platform, it sounds like building everything from scratch. Yeah. But the toolbox the cloud provides, it's actually not building everything from scratch. No. A lot of the core stuff is a service. So it's basically what you need to codify is the logic on top of that.
Yeah, you're calling the services, right? Yeah. At the same time. So a great example I find that is Amazon Cognito, which you can create users in it, you can do user management in it, you can do everything in it. They have the services to provide it to you to do it in a programmatic way as well. Yeah. Single sign-on is in there. I'm like, okay, why would I build this again?
Yeah, exactly.
This whole thing that everybody has built a million times. I probably think developers have done it like multiple times in their life. Yeah. Why would you do it again? Yeah. People will say, okay, you will have vendor lock-in. Well, that's a good. It's a. I know why they say it, but it's more from an IT side, right? A lot of the business side won't say, okay, we have lock-in, right? They don't see that.
It's about the exit and how costly is this exit. Yeah. And if we discussed it briefly before, but like if you look at how outsourcing went, like in the past, and still certain deals still nowadays, it's with 5-year cycles, right? Like you do a tender, and you have your long list, your short list, you select a supplier, and they're gonna run your IT for 5 years, and then all the hardware is being deprecated after 5 years, and the whole process starts over. And if you select a different vendor, you basically move your whole business from vendor A to vendor B. That's how stuff went in the past.
It's even more impact, in my opinion. Yeah, because in most cases you need to work with new people. They need to know what your platform actually is. They need to do all these kinds of things instead of just lifting and shifting your infrastructure, right? It's more than just that. So what I was wondering about is that you mentioned mission critical. So mission critical to me sounds like you're doing kind of space age stuff or something like that. But what does that to you? What does that mean, and how do you define that? Right. So you've already mentioned it. It kind of evolved through the years. But what does it mean to you right now? If I say mission critical, what does it mean?
Yeah, I think in the past it was very much about the core processes, support the IT support in the core processes of a customer, and basically if something fails there, that the CEO is worried about his business, right? Like I think that's how we defined it in the past. But given also, so it's changing. I think our definition as well. So I think we also came up with the term society critical. Also the desire we all know about, like a lot of the IT troubles our government has, to see if we can make a difference there. So that's another angle. But I think what we also see is, given the high pace of technology change and digitalization, but also a changing world, is that a lot of companies nowadays really feel the urge to become more agile, changeable, flexible. Because if they don't do, they might go out of competition, right? Like we know the examples of Kodak and
and all the retail things that we have in the Netherlands and stuff like that. Yeah.
So a lot of companies, I think, also are stuck with the IT portfolio, right? Like the CIO wants to move forward, but he cannot, right? Like the IT organization is how to say, fully booked, and they can't move forward. So looking for ways to move faster, and I think for some companies it's really about like who becomes the fastest will survive eventually, and that's about like changing to this new world.
And what I was wondering about before we move on, we talked about Amazon for a little bit. Is that the only platform you build on at the moment?
No.
Which ones do you use?
The three big ones at the moment. So we do business on Amazon, Microsoft Azure, and Google. And but it's more in a proof of concept. We're also looking at Alibaba Cloud. So.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I haven't seen anything yet in terms of actually using it, but it's coming up a little bit. I've seen it too. It's funny because we met at the AWS summit
exactly.
in Amsterdam. So that's why I was wondering. So you have that transition from a hosting company to a software, or more towards the software development side. How was that for people that were working at the company at that moment? Because I can imagine that if you're primarily doing hosting or whatever, and then all of a sudden you need to move to a software side, which can be daunting. How was that transition like? So did you need to hire new people, or did you need to, or did actually the people that were already working there transition as well? Or how did that go?
Yeah, I think both. So we obviously hiring other people or with different skills, and I think that's also the company is becoming bigger. The services are diversifying. I think what also helped is that we built our own cloud platform in 2011. We're basically commoditizing a lot of the infrastructure knowledge we had to support these mission critical workloads, and at the same time introduced and it's a DevOps concept, right? Like infrastructure as code, where you start to treat your infrastructure much more as you would do with software. And I think that introduced a lot of the continuous integration, continuous development type of principles to the more operations focused side of the company. And I think that really helped also for a lot of these engineers to basically facilitate software development. So in that sense, these people changed the role and the value they are actually delivering. But also introducing training for people to adapt to this new world.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. I mean,
operations. There will always still be a need for operations, right? Like there's a lot of talk about no ops and this kind of stuff, but in the end, even your Lambda or your serverless application runs in a network, and if stuff goes haywire, you still need the people who can actually troubleshoot that. Or if there is, performance issues, it really helps to have this infrastructure knowledge in your teams, so to say.
Yeah, and that's a common misconception of serverless, right? People think that, okay, it runs serverless, so you don't need anyone anymore. That's not the way it works.
If it breaks, it really helps to have full stack knowledge, at least having an idea what's happening behind the scenes, even if it's abstracted away by Amazon or Google or Amazon or Microsoft.
Whoever does it. But it's the interesting part about that to me is we had a thing as well on our side where we wanted to put a Lambda function in a VPC, and we wanted to have internet access. I can tell you that's a little bit daunting. But that's kind of an example of it doesn't just work all the time, right? And that's of course the premise of serverless is that you have a lot less management, which is true. You don't need to update the underlying operating systems and everything like that. But it doesn't mean you don't have any work anymore. That's the thing. And that's also I think the hosting companies are seeing that as well, is that okay, moving to a cloud or moving to a cloud that has serverless or whatever doesn't mean you're out of business, right? No. There is still someone that needs to manage it a little bit.
Yeah, and I think also the individual impact of a more traditional ops engineer is actually growing, right? Like the amount of developers an ops engineer is able to facilitate on its own is changing rapidly. Like I think in the past, if you had like one ops guy helping out, like let's say a handful of developers, that was pretty common. But I think nowadays you even want how do you say verhoudingen? 1 to 200, 200, 300, and maybe even beyond that of ops versus developers.
Yeah, because they don't need to actually think about the whole infrastructure in that sense. That's the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some projects that you were on. Just what kind of projects do you usually see, right? So what are some of the challenging projects that you see on a day-to-day basis? Because I know you work for a lot of companies, but it's to me it's more interesting to see what kind of problems do these people have? So these companies, what do you see?
Yeah, so a recent one I've been putting quite some energy in lately, and that's about like it's a customer with a supply chain, so it's about optimizing their supply chain, and there's a real business driver in this optimization, right? Like if they can do stuff more efficient, it's
better.
Yeah, it's better. Very much business driven, but they have an IT organization who is currently not able to help them out in a fast way. So that's where we come in and help the business with their business challenge, so focusing on that, and obviously aligning that with their internal IT organization. So that's a challenge we see. But it's also still the other extreme side. So this is the very modern serverless approach. Yeah. But the other one is also still the traditional side of things, right? Like a very critical IT landscape with a lot of traditional components, a lot of Oracle, big database backends. Yeah. But extremely, extremely critical towards our customer. And we still need to run that as well. And that's also about a lot of security and compliance. They are extremely heavily regulated. So everything needs to be in order. We need to be are audited on that. So we need to have proof that we operate the environment according to the promises we make in that respect. So I think the how do you say, the spectrum of challenges is only growing. So we still have the more traditional side of things versus like the companies realizing I really, really need to change now, or otherwise
I'm going out of business or whatever.
Yeah, worst case. And we even have customers actually also And I have a lot of respect for that. Customers actually articulating that, like, so we know as a company that if we don't change, we'll be going out of business.
Yeah. And that's for me an interesting perspective here is that when you get at a client that has an internal IT organization and you're coming from the outside, so a lot of times what happens is that they will feel it as a threat, right? Sure. They will think like, okay, what's happening here, right? Yeah. There are all these maybe these guys or girls are coming in and they are going to do a project, and we're not. Well, you're maybe kept in the loop, but you still like, okay, why, right? Yeah. How do you kind of mitigate that? So how do you don't get that feeling? So
it's always a challenge, and we've seen that in all the projects we've done to a certain extent. I think what's a bit of a new approach we're doing. We've done that now with one client. Is that we actually so there's another angle to it as well, right? Like so. Some CIOs, they see that they become technology company and they must be able eventually to do it themselves. But they also know that they are not capable of doing so yet. So
they need experience from someone else.
And how we do that with the customer currently, and that's pretty successful, is that we basically first come in and show how this works, right? Like how modern CI/CD processes works against the cloud platform. And basically build a foundation, also in alignment with the internal IT organization, but with some freedom. We give some guarantees on a higher abstraction level, so we are able actually to do just our job. And then in the second phase, we have them participate, giving them access to CI/CD pipelines, so they can actually start leveraging. We call it a bit of bumper bowling. So you have, it's bowling. Everyone knows the bumper bowling, right? Like you have the bumpers in the bowling alley, and everybody can basically hit a pin on the bowling alley. So that's what we built for those internal teams. So they can actually start bowling and hit the pins, and we make sure in the boundaries, like security has been arranged for, so stuff stays secure and data don't come out on the street.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, they get hands-on practice, maybe some formal education on the side, gearing up for the phase that they actually just do themselves, and that we hand over the environment to them. So it's a phased approach, and so far that seems to resonate with customers. And the first project where we did it, actually, we're now moving towards the last phase.
It's as you said, it's a little bit like a bike with training wheels as well, right?
Exactly.
So you're still helping someone, and then after that you kind of remove the wheels and you still hold them a little bit.
Mom, without hands.
But that's the thing, right? So it is that's interesting because you're basically working together with the client instead of or working together with the IT organization of the client, because it's not like you're coming in to swoop away their work.
Exactly.
Right? It's just helping them along.
And they have valuable knowledge, right? Yeah. Like as well, quite often, most often, I must say.
Domain knowledge that you don't have as an external company in that sense.
And it also helps us scaling, right? Like, so if we can leverage their existing IT organization, also makes our life easier, right? Like, so with the same amount of engineers, we can also service more customers in that perspective. Yeah.
Cool. So to wrap up, I have one more final question, the most interesting one, I think, always. But what are you most proud of since you started at Schuberg Philis?
Oh, that's always a
hard one.
hard question. I think what makes me proud is the company we are, right? Like, is that we are, and that's obviously we do that with everybody in the company. That we are able to make happy customers, also proven, right? Like it's Giarte does research to that. So I think that makes me very proud, is that we can actually deliver stuff which has value and makes our customers happy. From a personal perspective, like having the change from this more traditional company towards a company embracing public cloud and actually providing the same services and guarantees and achieve the same customer satisfaction. And obviously don't do that alone, but obviously they have a part in it. And I'm proud to see that really happening. And also seeing that we can build a healthy business out of that. So basically making the change from as a company. Yeah.
Very cool. Cool. So I would like to thank you for your time.
Thank you
for being here. I was wondering, so how can people find Schuberg Philis? They can probably schubergphilis.com, something like that, right?
It's www.schubergphilis.com.
I will link it down below, so we don't have to spell it.
It's a complex name, but you'll find it. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you again. And for the listeners, you can find the Bits vs. Bytes podcast on bitsvsbytes.com, also on all major podcasting platforms, and of course on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. It's all Bits vs. Bytes. And I would like to thank you for listening, and until next time.